Mueller probe in the Southern District of New York. The scrutiny of Donald Trump's businesses, White House, and family is about to be the primary focus of the House Judiciary Committee. And if the Mueller probe is something that has Donald Trump frenzied and wild-eyed, the House investigations may very well be his undoing. The House Judiciary Committee today launching a massive investigation into Donald Trump. NBC News reporting, quote, Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler said the request issued to 81 individuals and entities would help the committee probe three main topics. Obstruction of justice. That includes the potential interference by the president into criminal investigations. Public corruption. That includes violations of the Emoluments Clause. And abuses of power, including attacks on the free press, the judiciary, and law enforcement agencies. The president was asked today if he'd cooperate.
Mr. President, are you going to cooperate with Mr. Nadler?
I cooperate all the time with everybody. And you know the beautiful thing? No collusion. It's all a hoax. You're going to learn about that as you grow older. It's a political hoax. There's no collusion. There's no anything.
Did you get that? Could all this build to impeachment proceedings? Washington Post writes, quote, Nadler's request is significant not only because of the expansive amount of material he's seeking, but because his committee has jurisdiction over impeachment. Any hearings exploring whether Trump committed high crimes and misdemeanors would take place before Nadler's panel. Today's sweeping document request speaks directly to Nadler's own philosophy on potential impeachment proceedings, that the bar is very high, but with Trump, the evidence must be pursued and shared with the public.
Before you impeach somebody, you have to persuade the American public that it ought to happen. You have to persuade enough of the opposition party voters or of the Trump voters that you're not just trying to steal.
It's a very high bar.
Yeah, it is a very high bar. That you're not just trying to steal the last election, to reverse the results of the last election. We may or may not get there, but what we have to do is protect the rule of law.
And that's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. National security reporter for the Washington Post, Evelyn Barrett, former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner, Jeremy Bash, a former chief of staff at both the CIA and Pentagon, and with us at the table, Associated Press White House reporter Jonathan Lemire, back from a tour de force in Hanoi, and Doug Thornell, a former senior advisor at the DNC. Jeremy Bash, if I were a Democrat and if I wanted impeachment to be handled by someone who understands it both from the legal side and in the human side, that the American public needs to be shown the facts, not told the facts. They need to see the evidence presented, pursued, tested before anyone sort of lurches toward impeachment. Chairman Nadler is the person I'd want in charge of that.
Yeah, Nicolle, I've watched Jerry Nadler over many years. He's very careful. He's very smart. He's very targeted, and I think he understands that before anybody can begin to discuss the I word, impeachment, first the Democrats' job is to conduct oversight. And elections do have consequences, Nicolle. And here we are just about 5 months post the midterm election day, and you see the first salvo of a very large but targeted effort by Chairman Nadler to look at the full spectrum of activity inside the Trump orbit that really has been counter to the rule of law. And that, of course, is core to the Judiciary Committee's jurisdiction.
Glenn, if I were someone that wanted to keep lawyers up at night, I would do this dangerous game of trying to put the people in the boxes. So who's in the obstruction investigation? Who's in the emoluments investigation? And I'll leave that to you guys. But let me just put up some of the names that we learned Chairman Nadler wants to see documents produced from or talk to. Donald Trump Jr., Alan Weisselberg, Jared Kushner, Jeff Sessions, Mike Flynn, AMI, Don McGahn, Hope Hicks, Reince Priebus, Rona Graff, Roger Stone, and Sean Spicer. This list could tell the whole collusion story. You've got Roger Stone in there. They could tell the obstruction story. You've got Don McGahn, who we know spent at least 30 hours with Robert Mueller. You've got the witnesses to obstruction in there. You've got Mike Flynn, who may have had a pardon dangled in front of him on obstruction. You've got, I mean, this seems to be a group of people who could tell the Judiciary Committee a whole lot about a whole lot.
Nicolle, it's like a misconduct jamboree. And I think one of the things that
is going to be really interesting to see, and I don't think we've seen it yet, is when some of these witnesses are hauled before Congress, who might claim the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination. Because let's look at Weisselberg, for example. It's almost cliche that a bookkeeper might end up helping bring down a criminal organization. But we've heard the reporting that Weisselberg may have only been given limited immunity to testify about the campaign finance violation piece, and his immunity may not cover other acts of misconduct he may have been involved in as the chief financial officer for the Trump organization. So, he's going to have a decision to make. If he's hauled before Congress and is asked sort of wide, broad range of questions about what he has done over the years for the Trump organization, he's either going to have to invoke the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination if he's done anything wrong, and a betting man says he probably has, or if he decides to testify fully and completely about what the Trump organization has been up to financially over the past several decades, he's going to put himself in legal jeopardy. So I don't think we have yet heard witnesses plead the Fifth in front of Congress, but if we get the Weisselbergs and we get the Don Juniors talking about how he really didn't know anything about the Trump Tower Moscow deal, he was just on the periphery, there's some significant information and evidence that undercuts that claim, we may see people start taking the Fifth.
Devlin, Glenn brought us right to the specific, which was where I wanted to go with this quote from a piece by Natasha Bertrand over the weekend. It's a quote of Andy McCabe, who writes a little bit. He sort of ties the Trump era to the beginning of his career at the FBI when he was prosecuting or investigating Russian organized crime. And there's this quote from him. I think people think of following the money simply as a way of uncovering whether somebody's been involved in money laundering or a financial crime, which is, of course, important. But on a much more fundamental level, it's a way of understanding relationships and networks to understand who the person that I'm interested in is connected to, who they're communicating with, and who they're receiving money from or giving money to. It goes to proving the existence of an organization, or, as RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, would say, an enterprise. All of the musings coming out of the Southern District of New York, all of the undercurrents of Michael Cohen's testimony, and certainly this list released today of 81 targets from the House Judiciary Committee, and what we know Adam Schiff has talked about wanting to explore in the House Intel Committee, suggests that this may be precisely the framework around the question for the Trump organization and family.
Right. But I think what's interesting about this laundry list, and it is true, this is a huge list of topics and areas that they're looking at. And obviously they are trying to make connections, as you said, to try and understand if there is an enterprise here. But I think realistically, this list is so long. I'm most curious about what they will choose to focus on as they go forward, because presumably they're going to get traction on some of these issues and they're not going to get traction on others. Congress is not the most focused of entities on its best day. So I think what I'm looking for as this goes forward is which one of these areas are they going to really drill down on?
Let me put up to that point something Adam Schiff said yesterday. The House Intel Committee looks like it has its focus. Let's watch this, talk about it on the other side.
We are certainly looking deep into the set of issues around Moscow Trump Tower. We're also looking at persistent allegations that the Russians have been laundering money through the Trump organization. I don't know that that's true, but if it is, again, it's a profound compromise of this president.
Starting to hear that more and more, that the compromise was the conduct of money laundering, was the knowledge of negotiations around Trump Tower Moscow going on longer among Putin and his cohorts than it did among any American officials other than people who may have been listening. This idea that the money laundering was, as Steve Bannon is quoted as saying in Fire and Fury, one of the original sins.
That's right. It's sometimes when we hear the word compromise, people immediately reflect like the Steele dossier and some of the more salacious examples there, some of which have, of course, not been proven. There's more than that. There is a pattern of behavior over decades that investigators are looking at. While we know Robert Mueller is, and now today with what the House committee has done is saying, like, sort of game on. And what Michael Cohen hearing last week in some ways was sort of the opening act, or at the very least provides almost a roadmap. Like, he hit upon so many different subjects and so many different aspects of the Trump organization, and the president's family, of course, is intimately involved in that those are the avenues where the Democrats are now going to follow. And there's going to be many ways where they can put pressure on this White House. And, we saw from the president today in that clip you played, relatively relaxed, sort of downplaying it, his usual language about hoax and, it's a witch hunt or whatever it might be. But that's a very different president that we're seeing behind the scenes, privately and according to our reporting, what he's telling to aides. And we're seeing it spill out on Twitter, where he's very frustrated and very agitated and very worried as to where this could go. We saw him explode on Twitter about presidential harassment. That's become his new catchphrase here. As much as this White House has staffed up and hiring new lawyers, they know they might not be ready for the sheer onslaught, the sheer volume of what's coming from the Hill, from these various committees, including the one led by Chairman Nadler. And there's a sense there that that each day is going to yield something new, and each day that could get a step closer to the Oval Office.
There's also this misnomer. I worked in a White House, and Henry Waxman was the chair of the Oversight Committee. I produced my emails several times, once around Enron, once around, I think, Valerie Plamo. I mean, document production in and of itself is all those things. But Hillary Clinton's emails were ultimately referred to the Justice Department, but it started as a document request from the Benghazi Committee. So people underestimate the danger of these committee investigations at their own peril.
Right. And, Hillary Clinton did a great job when she testified before Congress on Benghazi, but that investigation over the long term really did damage to her presidency or to her candidacy. And I think what Democrats are going to try to do here, and they're going to do it very surgically and they're going to do it precise, is to make this go for a long time and uncover and basically do this in front of the public. Uncover what is inside of this administration, what is rotten and what is corrupt. And it's going to go until the election, I think. And that is, and again, we saw with Hillary Clinton, no matter how, I thought it was a bogus investigation, but it really did damage to her, to her approval numbers, her favorable numbers. And I think for Trump, we're looking at an administration now that much different than Hillary Clinton. We know for a fact that there is, I pretty much know for a fact that I think there's corruption there, that it's rotten, there's been abuse of power, and now it's going to be in front of the American people. Thank God. That's what Congress is supposed to do, oversight.
Jerry, Doug makes an interesting point. Mueller is doing his job the way any sort of legal professional or political professional understands he must do his job. But Rudy Giuliani has been able to do some damage in the public arena at a minimum among Trump's base because he's voiceless. He doesn't speak. We don't hear from him. He speaks through indictments and court documents that are indecipherable to anyone other than you and Glenn and reporters who read them all day. This process in Congress, in full view, I imagine what they can do in full view, they'll do in public hearings. What they have to do in private hearings, they'll do in private hearings. But seeing some of the people closest to Trump, if as Glenn suggests, his former bookkeeper has to take the fifth to avoid self-incrimination, these are the kinds of moments, these will be the exhibits that speak a million words louder than dozens of Mueller indictments or charging documents.
And the framers of our Constitution set it up that way, Nicolle, so that under Article 1, the Congress would conduct oversight largely in public. This is not a judicial proceeding. This is not a prosecution where if somebody is not charged in some ways, the case goes away quietly. No, this is designed to expose to the sunlight all of the activities of the executive branch. And just to pick up on Doug's point, I think the wisdom of Chairman Nadler's approach, unlike the Republican approach, say, in Benghazi, where they happened to investigate someone running for president, the only issue that they were interested in was something tethered to the Democratic nominee for president, which obviously was so transparent. The wisdom of Chairman Nadler's approach is that he's saying, no, we have to stand back. We have to look comprehensively at things across the spectrum that are concerning to us regarding the rule of law. And therein, I think Chairman Nadler will get support. He will pick up Republican support in certain cases, I hope, for some of his activities. And I think he will make the best case possible that if you follow the facts oversight will actually result in better, stronger government.
And I'm old enough to remember, as are you, Jeremy, when these functions used to be bipartisan. Hope springs eternal. Glenn Kirshner, I want to read you something. I want to get back to the specifics of what Chairman Nadler's list suggests he may delve into. This is from the New York Times write-up. From Donald McGahn, the former White House counsel alone, Nadler requested all documents related to the resignation of Michael T. Flynn as National Security Advisor, the firing of Mr. Comey, attempts to fire Mr. Mueller, communications with Mr. Trump about Sessions and the president's first attorney general, and about ongoing investigations into his presidency. That sounds like a detailed list there, put together in that one paragraph of the obstruction of justice case against the president.
And what you just said a few minutes ago, Nicolle, I was a prosecutor for 30 years, and perhaps I was never creative enough to come up with a catchphrase like the danger of the documents. But we have seen now in, just one aspect of Michael Cohen's testimony, when he presented the American people with a check signed by the president that was a reimbursement check for the illegal hush money payments Michael Cohen had made. And we saw that the conspiracy itself was ongoing, and it seeped right into the White House because Michael Cohen told the American people that the president in the White House said, hey, Michael, don't worry, the reimbursement for those hush money payments you made for me, they're on the way, they're in the mail, or they're being FedExed. That is an ongoing conspiracy that seeped into the White House. But you hit on the danger of the documents. We're going to see real-time memos that were authored by people to protect themselves and to protect their own interests and to protect against the lies the president might tell about the true circumstances of a conversation. So, man, those documents, even above and beyond the testimony that the American people are going to hear, they're going to corroborate the claims of the witnesses, and they're really going to show irrefutably that the president was up to no good.
It's such a good point, Devlin. It's something the New York Times and your colleagues have been reporting on in the context of Jared Kushner's background process, that officials were so concerned they took contemporaneous memos. And I want your thoughts on that, but I want to throw out one more piece of reporting from your newspaper about pardons. You all report lawmakers are investigating whether President Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, was involved in any discussions about possible pardons, which they view as a potentially ripe area of inquiry into whether anyone sought to obstruct justice. People familiar with the matter said. Cohen has said publicly he never asked for and would not accept a pardon from Trump, but people familiar with the matter said his knowledge on the topic seems to extend beyond that statement. So if you put together what we know Donald Trump's first lawyer, John Dowd, did when Manafort, or around the time, or actually before the time that Manafort and Flynn were charged, they dangled pardons in front of him reportedly. If Cohen is another person around whom a pardon was suggested, you certainly have a pattern of attempting to obstruct their testimony or their cooperation after they were entangled.
Right, and that's why the pardon question is such a big question for all these guys, including Cohen, because anyone who brings it up in the middle of essentially their investigation and prosecution is arguably meddling with justice, obstructing justice in a major way. And so that's why it's such a red-hot topic, and that's why the lawmakers are trying to figure out how much meat is really there.
Devlin and Glenn, you make me smarter. Sometimes I don't have to Google what you've said after the show, but I appreciate all of it. Thanks for spending some time with us. After the break, a stunning new piece of reporting documenting exactly how the media-run state pulls the strings from Fox News headquarters in New York. Also ahead, questions about Donald Trump's fitness for office back in the atmosphere after a 2-hour turn on the CPAC stage in which Donald Trump viciously attacked Robert Mueller, mocked Jeff Sessions, and called Jim Comey a bad, bad guy. And spy games, how the nation's top spies have to coax the president into paying attention to the world's threats with mixed success rates. All that coming up. Donald Trump's codependent relationship with Fox News has become so normalized that we hardly bat an eyelash when Trump mimics something he hears on Fox and Friends with more ease than he repeats anything learned in an intel briefing. But we have posed the question here before. Who's running whom? It's often seemed much more like a media-run state than state-run media. And now there's this. The latest extensive reporting from Jane Mayer at The New Yorker provides an answer. In addition to chronicling Fox News' journey from partisan to propaganda, the piece shines new light on previously unknown products of the Trump-Fox relationship. For starters, The New Yorker reports a Fox digital reporter uncovered proof of the Stormy Daniels relationship and the ensuing agreement with Trump. But, quote, after getting one non-committal answer after another from her editors, the reporter at last heard from the head of FoxNews.com. She told colleagues that he said to her, "Good reporting, kiddo, but Rupert wants Trump to win, so just let it go." The New Yorker piece also describes, through several sources, 2 instances where Trump was given advance notice of debate questions, an especially eye-popping piece of reporting, considering how angry Trump was, but a similar situation having to do with Hillary Clinton. And finally, perhaps most importantly, the piece details a previously unknown attempt by Donald Trump himself to put pressure on the Justice Department to intervene in the merger of AT&T and Time Warner, a move seen by some as retaliation against the company that owns CNN. Blocking the deal would also be good for Fox. Joining Jonathan and Doug here on set, Zerlina Maxwell, SiriusXM Director of Progressive Programming, also former advisor to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and Brett Stevens, columnist for the New York Times. Jeremy's still here as well. Let me start with you, Brett, because I know the merger was something you reported on at the time, and follow you and George Conway and others on Twitter who thought that single act in normal times would be a full-blown scandal.
I actually think it's one of the biggest, almost provable scandals of the Trump administration. The president seems to have clearly intervened to get his Justice Department and his top antitrust official to reverse an earlier judgment and block the merger of these 2 behemoths. AT&T, I spoke with the CEO of AT&T at the time. He himself was so outraged that he gave me a pretty powerful on-the-record interview talking about a very peculiar timeline. A district judge then promptly reversed the Justice Department's decision to block the merger, and the appellate court just affirmed the district judge. Look, the point here is that the President of the United States appears to have suborned his Justice Department in order to pursue a political vendetta against a media entity, CNN, and to use all the engines of government in order to do that. And I would just put it to everyone watching the show who supports Trump: if Obama or a President Clinton had done it, would you not call that impeachable?
They're closet viewers, the Trump supporters who watch the show. I know a few. Jeremy Bash, let me get you on the record. It seems like this is where Trump benefits from the volume business of scandals he does. But this piece has some very careful reporting in here about Gary Cohn. And they detail a conversation between Gary Cohn and then White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. We don't hear John Kelly's side of the story in her reporting, but we hear Gary Cohn saying very clearly, someone who cares about his reputation on Wall Street and in polite society, that this was, I'm paraphrasing here, but some sort of red line, that this is not how we do business. What do you make of these sort of emerging glimpses of the efforts by human guardrails to stop Donald Trump from doing things beyond norm busting, but impeachable or illegal or highly unethical, or whatever term you want to use?
Well, here, and I think we see another example of one of the professionals inside the White House, Gary Cohn, of course, who had led Goldman Sachs. And I think it's fair to say is kind of an institutionalist. He's saying, no, Mr. President, we can't intervene in an antitrust matter being run by the Department of Justice any more than we can intervene in a prosecution or a special counsel's investigation. And that seemed to have been echoed also by John Kelly, but to no avail, because the president forced them to get the White House involved, to get involved in the Justice Department's efforts. And you got the president basically overriding the word and the advice of aides who are loyal to the institutions, and the president saying, I don't care, I want everyone loyal to me. And I think we can expect to see a lot more of this, Nicole, as more oversight shines light on the way that the president has been involving himself in the supposed independent actions of our government.
And you don't need a Democratic lawmaker or a left-leaning individual to suggest that this is as grave as Brett and Jeremy say it is. George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband, said this today on Twitter. If proven, such an attempt to use presidential authority to seek retribution for the exercise of First Amendment rights would unquestionably be grounds for impeachment.
Yes. Now, George Conway, of course, is a noted and vocal critic of the president, unlike his wife, who still works in the West Wing. As a follow-up on Jeremy's point, Gary Cohn also was probably the only senior Trump official to leave in a matter of principle. He quit. It was over tariffs. It wasn't Charlottesville. But he did leave on those terms, not because he was forced out. There's no question, though, that this is a serious matter, and that this is a normal presidency, as you just said. It would be the story. Here, it'll be an hour or two. Like, it'll be a day or two. It shouldn't be. It should be. Light should be shown on it.
Well, let me just push back a little bit. I mean, the oversight committees.
Right. That is potentially the game changer. Is that up until this moment, with the Democrats in charge, this would have been a bad story for a couple days and then gone away. Now there's an ability for it to be pursued. That the oversight committee can go after this and subpoena the documents involved, talk to the witnesses there, and make something more of it. And that is going to be the test. To follow up what you're just saying, is that to this point, the president has been able to shake off scandal after scandal. And yes, they've impacted his poll numbers or, the judgment of pundits, but he would largely remain unscathed. That could change now, that some of this stuff could stick to him. He no longer has the allies on the Hill to make the stuff go away.
I want to get your thoughts on this, because this does seem like the kind of thing that even if you fly under the radar, this is absolutely worthy of the Democratic, of the committees investigating, getting to the bottom of this. She's got some reporting that a committee could try to corroborate, either in closed or open session, with two senior advisors to the president. And it is all the things that Brett and Jonathan and Jeremy say it is. It seems like a scandal ripe for some sort of correction, some sort of cleaning out of the corruption Trump tried to impart on his Justice Department.
Right, and it's a wonderful moment to be in post the 2018 midterms, where, as Jonathan said, we can now actually do something about these allegations that seem so disturbing, and in terms of the abuses of power from his position as president. But the Fox News thing, I was on with Gabe Sherman yesterday, and obviously he has done so much great reporting in terms of Fox News and Roger Ailes, and he said something that stuck with me. He said that post-Watergate, Roger Ailes' entire concept of Fox News was to prevent that from happening again. And so now we're watching Donald Trump have scandal after scandal after scandal, except you have a right-wing echo chamber which cannot be pierced in order to give facts to the people who essentially, who may change their minds if they heard some of the detail around some of these scandals. And so the idea in the conversations that we keep having about, like, what's going to matter, are we ever going to hit bottom, I think finally now we will, because we have an alternative to the Fox News platform. We now have congressional hearings, which will also play on Fox News, where some of that truth will at least get to some of their audience.
But I would add, just, conservatives, the few sincere conservatives who remain, really ought to be outraged. This is supposed to be a pro-business administration. Here you've got two companies trying to complete what's called a vertical merger. The vertical mergers haven't been challenged for a very long time. They're not seen as anti-competitive. And the only reason why this is blocked is because a partisan president has personal pique against a private business. Right. And if conservatives wouldn't like Democrats behaving that way against business, they should especially not like Republicans doing so.
I want to just put up one thing for you and give you the last word. This is the list of people from Fox News who found their way into the administration. Bill Shine is the communications director, I think still being paid out by Fox News. Ben Carson was a contributor. Mercedes Schlapp was a contributor. Heather Nauert was at the State Department and a nominee to be the UN representative. John Bolton was at Fox News. Scaramucci, KT McFarland, Sebastian Gorka, who's to fill in the blank for Fox News. I read today he doesn't work there anymore. This is extraordinary.
Yeah, I used to think that Fox News was an arm of the Republican Party. Now I think the White House is an arm of Fox News.
Yeah, me too.
And their staff, and the White House is staffing up with people who were either contributors or ran the network. Bill Shine ran that network. And it's paying off for the president right now, and it's paying off for Fox News with ratings. But I think that, I think as we get into a 2020 election, I think it's going to be a very difficult spot for Fox, especially post-election, if they are still tied to this man, and we're seeing whatever may happen with Mueller or what may happen with these investigations. If he is such a damaged person, either heading into the election or if he even doesn't make it to the election, where does Fox News go from there? I don't really know what they're...
It's a conversation
where do they go after
we'll pick up. But I think the biggest problem is that Fox News now stands for someone who is neither Republican nor conservative. We'll see how that ends. After the break, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, the CPAC edition. That's next.
The president has not yet been able to demonstrate the stability, nor some of the competence that he needs to demonstrate in order to be successful.
Again, having some understanding of the levers that a president can exercise, I worry about, frankly, the access to nuclear codes.
Trump's fitness to serve has been debated privately and publicly for years now. His appearance this weekend at CPAC likely added fuel to the argument made by Senator Corker years ago. Starting off hugging the flag on stage, the president delivered the longest speech of his presidency to date, clocking in at over 2 hours. Take a listen.
This is how I got elected, by being off script. Darling, is the wind blowing today? I'd like to watch television, darling. The Attorney General says I'm going to recuse myself. And I'm in the White House and I was lonely. I said, let's go to Iraq. $7 trillion and we have to fly in with no lights. And yet I see senators that are there for 20 years. White hair. See, I don't have white hair. Then that fake CNN and others say, he asked Russia to go get the emails. Horrible. They don't respect us. They think we're stupido. They don't respect us. He's bad. He's a bad guy. Russia, 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 Russia. My wife said, you never spoke to anybody from Russia, darling. I said, that's right. And all of a sudden, they're trying to take you out with bull, okay? I said, what's your name? Sir, my name is Raisin. What the hell kind of a name? I said, Raisin, like the fruit? And I have friends that for 35 years, hey, Don, how you doing? Hey, Donnie, I love you, Donnie. For 35 years, now they call, Mr. President, sir. I'm going to regret this speech. This speech should have been delivered 1 year from now, not now, damn it.
Someone say stupido?
So the Associated Press ran a fact check of that speech. I think it went 100,000 words. What we've seen, though, is time and time again when the president is dealt a defeat. And last week he was dealt two. The Michael Cohen testimony, which, of course, was extremely damaging and very embarrassing in front of cameras broadcast to the world. And then the failure to come to any sort of agreement in Vietnam during his summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And what we've seen is when he has setbacks like that, he needs an outlet. Sometimes that's Twitter, but often it's whatever his next speech is, particularly if it's in front of a friendly audience, which this one certainly was. And with the crowd goading him on and laughing at what he said and, and cheering when he needed to, and even with a lock her up chant, mind you, how many years are we from the election, he fed off of it and he needed it as a release. I was talking to someone after the speech, someone in his orbit who said that they saw this coming, that the president had been in a mood all week after what had happened. He was really angry that he felt like the Kim Jong-un summit in part had been sabotaged by Democrats because they had put the Cohen hearing opposite it. He was embarrassed that he was asked a question about Cohen while in Vietnam. Maybe it was by me. And then that, which of course was as a defense of that question, because the White House, of course, was very angry and barred a few reporters from the next event. I mean, that is as much of a story as the Kim Jong-un story. The Cohen hearing was one that could help decide the fate of this presidency, as discussed with all the hearings and investigations that are coming.
And I hope you said maybe because you don't want to make it about you. I mean, you should be proud of asking that question. That was the news of the day.
Well, thank you. Yes, that is the news of the day. It was about the White House had set expectations so low for that summit. We didn't anticipate there would be much news or a breakthrough out of that, and it turned out we were all right. And with the Cohen hearing about the prepared testimony had already been dropped, we knew he was about to step up on the Hill and testify himself. The president needed to be asked about that, and he took questions. My colleague Jeff Mason from Reuters and I asked a couple questions about the North Korea summit. He answered those, but when I asked a question about Cohen, he did not. And then Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, tried to bar all reporters from the next event, which was the dinner with Kim Jong-un. And only after we pushed back and the photographer said they wouldn't go in and take pictures of the event unless there was some sort of editorial presence did she relent. And the print puller was able to go in, though a few of us, myself included, were still not allowed. But it was his frustration from that whole week that led to this speech.
Let me bring Jeremy in, and I just want to get you on the record, Jeremy Bash. I'm going to put you on the spot. How many people in the national security establishment see a speech like CPAC and share Director Clapper's assessment of Donald Trump as the man with the nuclear codes?
Many do. Most executives, if they encounter some stress in the job, they hit the elliptical machine, or they binge watch Fauda, or maybe they sneak an extra Klondike bar. This guy goes absolutely nuts, goes totally off the rails. And the idea that he encounters a foreign policy crisis, he doesn't achieve something he wants in diplomatic channels, and he somehow has to have an outlet for his anger, for his frustration, for his stress. I mean, nothing he said in that speech was coherent. And it makes you wonder, Nicole, just precisely how he would react if faced with a major threat to our homeland or a major national security crisis. It's very, very scary.
So I'm going to disagree. Look, first of all, to say the obvious, that was a speech worthy of Fidel Castro. It was a speech worthy of a certain style of demagogue who can hold an audience, his audience, for hours on end. That being said, it was a very effective political speech. And I'm as appalled as everyone else, but what Trump was doing in that audience is that he was connecting with his base. He was once again establishing that almost animal link between the leader and the mass. And I think we're very foolish to simply dismiss it as the ranting of a madman who is on his last leg.
No, Brett, I'm not dismissing it. I'm not dismissing it, Brett. I mean, that's why I think we came into this as a question about his competence. If I were dismissing it, I would have played the laugh lines. I mean, we'd talk about how he called Mueller's investigation bullshit. I said, I think that what Jeremy just said is pretty revelatory, that there are countless people in the national security establishment who question his competence, because I think what's on display is a serious lack of.
Right.
Whether it's an effective political trope or not.
Oh, I would question his competence in a million different ways.
I think if he took all his clothes off, it would have been even better. But I'd still be asking these questions as a political tool. But I love me as I am. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Brad may be right, but I was making a different point, which is that when faced with the stress of the national security crisis, this president seemed to be farther removed from the truth. And that is a huge problem that many people are concerned about.
Right. I think that it's not specifically whether or not it was effective for this audience, because I do think that they were eating it up. And that's why he stayed out there for so long, because he needs that positive feedback loop. I think that what's scary is that the ongoing national security crisis that is this president, that is Jared Kushner's security clearance, which is still not the top story, and he's still not fired.
He was unfired.
And so, right. But I think that the fact that the national security threat is still present, and he has not yet faced the crisis that Jeremy is talking about. And if that's how he deals with, quote, stress, or when he's under sort of emotional, he's emotionally unstable, if that's how he reacts, then that is the threat. I don't think it's whether or not it's a politically smart speech. I think it's more to the point of, if that's how he responds to stress, then that puts us in physical danger.
I'm just going to give you the last word.
Look, what he did was clever. He put the weak behind him by changing the subject. And Donald Trump does this again and again. And whether it's from some feral instinct of his to move forward, or a kind of high-level political genius, and in the end doesn't make a difference. What really scares me about Trump isn't so much in terms of a national security crisis, isn't so much an out-of-control temperament. It's, to use his word, stupido.
I didn't give you a chance.
Yeah, so I just want to say, I thought the most dangerous thing he said in that speech was that we have people in Congress who hate our country.
Yeah.
That, to me, I thought was the most dangerous thing he said in the speech, and should never come from the President of the United States. Bush would have never said that. Barack Obama never would have said that.
And I guess just to button this up, not only would they not have said that in front of their base, they wouldn't have thought it.
No.
After the break, the stupefying lengths Donald Trump's advisors have to go to make information more digestible during briefings, and the three-word question he repeatedly asked them. That's next.
Do you take Kim Jong-un at his word?
The president takes him at his word.
No, I know he does, but what about you?
My opinion doesn't matter. My opinion is that I'm the
national security advisor of the president.
Right,
Your opinion matters quite a bit.
I am not the national security decision maker. That's his view. My job now is to help the president, give him his advice, give him my advice. He'll make the decision.
He's not even getting the intel or advice he needs, it would seem. We know the president doesn't read his PDB, relying solely on verbal briefings. And a new piece of reporting, the New York Times, details just how far these oral briefings are catering to his liking, sometimes at the expense of valuable information. From that report, quote, intelligence officers steeped in how Mr. Trump views the world now work to answer his repeated question. This is real from the report. Who is winning? What the president wants to know, according to former officials, is what country is making more money or gaining a financial advantage. While the professionals do not criticize Mr. Trump's focus, they do question whether those interests are crowding out intelligence on threats like terrorism and the maneuvers of traditional adversaries, developments with foreign militaries, or geopolitical events with international implications. No big deal, guys. Jeremy Bash?
Well, Nicolle, nation states have a lot of motivations. Finances are one of them, but they certainly aren't the only one. And to overly focus on them, and as if he were making these decisions from Trump Tower as head of the Trump Organization, I think undermines and undercuts American national security interests. And it's a blind spot. And I think it's a big threat to our country to have a commander-in-chief who doesn't understand the full landscape of concerns and threats and challenges that our country faces. And I think what happened fundamentally in Hanoi, Nicolle, is that the president could not convince and has never been able to convince the North Koreans from denuclearization. It's not just that it was an issue of sanctions. Actually, what the president said was happening in Hanoi and the lead up to Hanoi since the Singapore summit actually never happened. It was totally divorced from the truth. And here again, we have a situation, and back to the earlier point, if next week the North Koreans test fire an ICBM, I think the president's reaction could be totally unhinged. I think it could be somewhat crazy and very, very dangerous.
Right. Now, the President Trump is certainly not the first president to receive economic information in these briefings. We know that Barack Obama, for instance, after the crash in 2008, 2009, he did for a time as well. But what's different here is that that's his focus and sometimes his sole focus. And the Hanoi summit is a great example of his very unorthodox view of diplomacy, where he felt like just his one-on-one, his rapport with Kim could seal some sort of grand bargain. And they neglected the weeks and months of the traditional advance work, the staff work. There were staff discussions, of course, but not to the extent that usually happens for a summit of this magnitude, when really the summit itself is almost like a victory lap. The deal's kind of done. And then you go there, and he goes to Vietnam and, maybe works out a few last issues, shakes the hand, gets the photo op. That wasn't the case at all. And I do think there's people around the president and certainly the national security establishment in Washington that is very worried about the scenario that Jeremy just painted. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's true. It's an accomplishment. The North Korea has not had any kind of missile testing in quite some time, many, many months, maybe it's even a year at this point. But if suddenly that were to change, and Trump, as disappointed as he was there was no deal, still speaking very highly of Kim, suddenly if he feels like Kim has betrayed him, and because the way he looks at it was personally betrayed, because that's how he would take it. It was a personal betrayal. What happens next?
Well, can I press you? I mean, what are the theories? Are you picking up in your reporting any doomsday scenarios?
There is a concern that there would be perhaps a ramp up of, at least, if not hostilities, but the steps towards hostilities, which is the opposite of what we're getting now. A decision being made because on economics, the president is ratcheting down some of the war games, as he puts it, some of those military exercises with South Korea. He's saying he's doing to save money. Other people are worried that's making the Korean Peninsula far less safe.
Jeremy, I got to bring you back in on this. I mean, is there a preparation in the national security establishment? I mean, we know he de-escalates based on a whim. We know he takes the word of Kim Jong-un over this, savage beating and ultimate death of Otto Warmbier. Is there concern that he may escalate on the same sort of arbitrary and capricious whims?
Well, I don't know if our national security professionals are thinking about it through that lens, but what I think they are thinking about is we have to be on high alert in the Asia-Pacific region because we don't know what Kim Jong-un's going to do. After all, Kim Jong-un has a domestic political, in a sense, constituency to satisfy as well. If he came back to Pyongyang and in effect had to explain the failure of Hanoi, he actually put himself out there a lot as well, and now he comes back empty-handed. He's going to have to show his domestic constituency, his own government, his own cadre of party leaders exactly hopefully that he's still tough, that he's in charge. He may do something precipitous, and that's why I think our troops are going to be on high alert.
This is why Jeremy Bash pays for my Ambien every month, folks. We're going to sneak in a break. We'll be right back. Back, Brett.
Well, I think one point we should add to the North Korea discussion is, to me, the amazement of watching John Bolton alongside the president parlaying with Kim Jong-un. I was at the Wall Street Journal's editorial page for many years, and if there was anything more consistent than John Bolton's mustache, was his opposition to any sort of parlays with North Korea, because they couldn't be trusted, because they would cheat on every agreement that they would make, because they were a heinous regime that held its own people in borderline slavery. And by the way, he was absolutely right on all of those points, which makes it so amazing to me to see him alongside the president in Hanoi and then refusing to take a position of his own when being interviewed on TV. Now, it may be that he saved us from a very terrible deal, in which case, okay, but it would say something if, at least from time to time, a senior member of the administration would say, no mas. I am not going to betray my values and my principles for the sake of being close to power.
So it seems to me that the president has deep contempt for the intelligence community, and I think that stems from the findings of the intelligence community that Russian impacted the election for him, right? And so that is bleeding into so many different things. It's bleeding into how he handled Otto Warmbier's death, right? He basically said he believed Kim Jong-un. It impacted how he takes intelligence on Russia today, right? And the same thing with Saudi Arabia. That's really dangerous, because I just wonder what does he believe, what does he not believe, and how scrambled is his mind with on intelligence and the intelligence community.
I think it just gives us all a reason as citizens to stay vigilant, to make sure our Congress folks are conducting the investigations that are necessary to hold him accountable, because the risks are very real.
Jeremy, you still there?
I'm here. Yeah.
I wonder if you can speak to Doug's good point about what he actually believes. What does the intelligence community think, if anything, he actually believes of what they've told him now for the better part of 2 years?
Yeah, I agree with Doug. I want to correct one slight thing, which was the finding wasn't that Russia impacted the election. It was that they interfered to help Donald Trump. It's an important distinction. But I think the larger point is the same, which is that Trump has never forgiven the intelligence community. He's assumed that there's a deep state that's out to get him, as opposed to a cadre of professionals who are duty-bound, sworn, and risk their lives, risk everything to protect us and tell the truth.
All right, before I thank everybody, thanks for your good work. I love that you tried to say that it wasn't you asking the question. You're the only reason we know what we know, because you're taking these trips and asking the questions. Good on you and all your colleagues.
Appreciate that.
My thanks to Jonathan Lemire, Zerlina, Brett Stevens, Doug, and Jeremy. That does it for our hour. I'm Nicolle Wallace. Thank you so much for watching. MTP Daily starts right now with my friend Katie Turin for Chuck. Hi, Katie.
Hi there, Nicole. And if it's Monday, Democrats are demanding